Tuesday, September 15, 1964, at 3:47 p.m., the air in the Palm Café on 125th Street turned cold. Bumpy Johnson was sitting at his usual corner table, a cigar in one hand and a coffee in the other, when officers Patrick Sullivan and James Kowalski marched in. They didn't come for coffee, they came with badges out and hands resting on their service weapons. In a voice loud enough for every patron to hear, Sullivan shouted the charges: illegal gambling, narcotics conspiracy, and assaulting an officer. But Bumpy didn't flinch. He looked at them with a mixture of amusement and pure contempt. Before they could reach for the handcuffs, Bumpy asked one question that stopped them dead. Which paycheck came in this week, Sullivan? Did Vincent Gigante pay you, or was it someone from City Hall? Sullivan's face flushed a deep, angry red as he hurled a racial slur at the man who practically owned Harlem. This wasn't just an arrest, it was a setup orchestrated by the Genovese family. But what these officers didn't realize was that Bumpy Johnson had been expecting them, and he had a plan that would bring the entire precinct to its knees. If you want to see how one man turned a corrupt arrest into a total takedown of the NYPD and the Italian mob, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't forget to like this video if you love seeing a master strategist at work, and drop a comment below. Do you think intelligence is a more powerful weapon than a gun? Let's get into Chapter 1. The atmosphere inside the Palm Café was thick with tension as the two officers stood over Bumpy. Sullivan and Kowalski were known around the 28th Precinct as Gigante's boys, officers who walked the thin line between the law and the mob's payroll. They expected Bumpy to resist or at least show fear, but the king of Harlem remained seated, calm and collected. He knew these charges were fabricated. He hadn't dealt drugs in years and certainly hadn't assaulted anyone recently. The racial slur Sullivan used wasn't just an insult, it was a desperate attempt to assert dominance over a man who clearly held more power than the badge they wore. As the handcuffs finally clicked shut around Bumpy's wrists, he leaned in and whispered to Sullivan that he should have taken a higher bribe, because the one he took today was going to cost him his career. The patrons watched in silence as Bumpy was led out, but the look in Bumpy's eyes wasn't one of a man going to jail, it was the look of a hunter who had just successfully baited a trap. The game had officially begun. As the police cruiser sped toward the precinct, the truth of the situation became clear. This wasn't a standard police operation, it was a targeted hit disguised as law enforcement. Vincent, the Chin Gigante, a rising power in the Genovese family, had grown tired of Bumpy Johnson's refusal to give up territory in Harlem. Gigante knew he couldn't kill Bumpy without starting a full-scale war he might lose, so he chose a more surgical approach: corruption. He had paid Sullivan and Kowalski a handsome sum to harass Bumpy and keep him tied up in the legal system. The plan was to bury Bumpy under a mountain of false charges, effectively neutralizing him while Gigante moved in on the Harlem numbers racket. What Gigante underestimated was Bumpy's network of informants. Bumpy had known about the meeting between Sullivan and Gigante's associates 3 nights prior. He knew the price of the officers' loyalty and exactly what they had been instructed to do. While the officers thought they were making a high-profile arrest, Bumpy was already several steps ahead, documenting every move they made. He was letting them play their roles perfectly. On September 19, 1964, just 4 days after the arrest at the Palm Café, the tables turned in a way the NYPD never saw coming. Officers Sullivan and Kowalski were off duty, likely spending the money they had received from Gigante, when they were intercepted by Bumpy's associates. There were no shots fired and no witnesses to the abduction. The two men who represented the law found themselves stripped of their authority and their weapons, taken to a secure, undisclosed location in the heart of Harlem. They were not beaten. Bumpy didn't need them bruised, he needed them broken. When Bumpy walked into the room, he didn't bring a gun. He brought a typewriter and several stacks of paper. He sat across from the terrified officers and explained the reality of their situation. The NYPD would look for them, but by the time they were found, their reputations would be unsalvageable. Bumpy gave them a choice. They could maintain their loyalty to a mobster who viewed them as disposable tools, or they could tell the absolute truth and hope Bumpy was feeling merciful. The choice was easy. The interrogation lasted for hours, but it wasn't the kind of questioning found in a police manual. Bumpy's associates acted as stenographers while Sullivan and Kowalski began to talk. Fear is a powerful motivator, and the officers, realizing that Gigante wouldn't be coming to save them, spilled everything. They didn't just confess to the setup at the Palm Café, they opened the floodgates on the entire 28th precinct. They detailed how Gigante had approached them, the exact locations of their meetings, and the amounts of cash exchanged. But then, the scope expanded. Under Bumpy's calm but firm pressure, they began naming other officers who were on the take. They described a systemic web of corruption where police protection was bought and sold like a commodity. Bumpy sat back, listening to the names and dates, occasionally prompting them for more detail when their memories seemed to fail. By the time the sun began to rise, Bumpy had more than just a defense for his arrest. He had a detailed map of the criminal infrastructure within the local police force. He had turned the hunters into the ultimate witnesses. The most devastating part of the night came when Bumpy forced the officers to write down a comprehensive list. This wasn't a short list of a few bad apples, it was a roster of 47 corrupt officers throughout the NYPD hierarchy. Sullivan and Kowalski wrote until their hands cramped, naming peers, superiors, and even individuals in City Hall who looked the other way for a price. To ensure the documentation was airtight, Bumpy had them sign and thumbprint every single page. He had them record audio statements, repeating the names and the crimes they had committed. This list, which would later be known in Harlem circles as the List of 47, was the ultimate leverage. It named names, cited specific bribes, and detailed the exact nature of the favors performed for the Italian mob. Bumpy knew that once this information was out, it would cause a political earthquake that would level the precinct. He now held the power to destroy the careers of nearly 50 men with a single phone call. The officers, now completely stripped of their dignity, watched as Bumpy carefully filed the papers into a leather briefcase. In a move that surprised the two officers, Bumpy ordered their release. After holding them for hours and extracting the most damaging information of their lives, Bumpy had them driven back to a quiet street and dropped off unharmed. He didn't want them dead. A dead cop brings the heat of the entire state, but a disgraced, terrified cop is a permanent asset. As they stepped out of the car, Bumpy told them to go back to work as if nothing had happened. He told them to keep the evidence they had planted against him moving through the system. He wanted the case against him to proceed because he wanted the platform of a courtroom. The officers were now living ghosts, walking through the precinct knowing that their own signed confessions were sitting in Bumpy's safe. They were no longer working for Gigante, and they certainly weren't working for the city. From that moment on, Sullivan and Kowalski were the most loyal employees Bumpy Johnson ever had. They knew that if Bumpy fell, they would fall 10 times harder. The arrest was still on the books, but the power dynamic had shifted 180 degrees. Bumpy's strategy was a masterclass in leverage. Instead of going to the press or the Internal Affairs Division immediately, he waited. He allowed Vincent Gigante to think his plan was working. Gigante was busy celebrating, believing he had finally neutralized the King of Harlem. Meanwhile, Bumpy began sending reminders to the other 45 officers on the list. Small notes, mentions of specific dates, or simply a look of recognition when he saw them on the street. The 28th precinct became a place of paranoia. No one knew who had talked, but everyone knew someone had. Bumpy was effectively paralyzing the police force without firing a single shot. He was also sending a message to Gigante: the police you think you own actually belong to me. This was the double threat mentioned in the records. He was destroying Gigante's influence while simultaneously holding the police department hostage. He had created a situation where the NYPD could not afford to prosecute him, and Gigante could no longer rely on his paid-off muscle to harass Bumpy. He was, for all intents and purposes, untouchable. By the time the legal proceedings for the September 15th arrest reached a critical point, the authorities were in a panic. The documentation Bumpy held was leaked in small, strategic doses to certain high-level officials. They realized that if Bumpy was forced to defend himself in open court, he wouldn't just be defending his innocence, he would be exposing the internal rot of the entire department. A negotiation was quietly called. It wasn't held in a courtroom, but in a private setting where the stakes were real. The NYPD and representatives for the city had to give Bumpy what he wanted. The fabricated charges were quietly dropped, citing procedural errors and lack of evidence. In exchange, Bumpy kept the most damaging parts of the list private, though he never surrendered the original documents. He used this leverage to ensure that Harlem remained under his control, free from the interference of Gigante's corrupt associates. Vincent Gigante, one of the most powerful criminals in New York, learned the hard way that when you play dirty with a man as smart as Bumpy, you only provide him with more dirt to bury you. The events of September 1964 proved once and for all that Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a street-level boss. He was an intellectual giant in a world of thugs. He proved that intelligence beats authority when you understand what leverage is and how to use it. The two cops who walked into the Palm Café thinking they were taking a gangster into custody ended up providing the very ammunition Bumpy needed to dismantle their entire operation. The legacy of this incident remained a dark cloud over the 28th Precinct for years. It served as a warning to both corrupt officers and rival mobsters. Bumpy Johnson didn't just fight with guns, he fought with information. He documented everything. He turned vulnerabilities into strengths. The list of 47 became a piece of underworld legend, a symbol of the day the law was used to defeat the lawless. Bumpy returned to his corner table at the Palm Café, ordered his coffee, lit his cigar, and continued his business, more powerful and respected than ever before. He had faced the system, the mob, and a racial slur, and he had come out on top by playing a game they didn't even realize was being played. Bumpy Johnson proved that the pen, and the signed confession, is mightier than the sword. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Harlem's most legendary power moves, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories from the streets. Like this video to help us share Bumpy's legacy, and comment below. What was the smartest part of Bumpy's plan? Was it releasing the cops, or keeping the list? We want to hear from you. Thanks for watching.